Thank you for your presentation. In your previous sheets, not in your recommendation, I refer to the ones you mentioned, the Central Bank of Aruba. In terms of, yes, no, go back to 2 sheets. Yes. You have AML, CFT regulations, you mentioned over-regulations of rules. I mean, these are based on law. Laws based on international standards. And we issue guidelines, and it's based on risk. So I don't understand your question of over-regulation.
Okay, if I may?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So the feedback we got, and I gave the example of POE as an example, where the AML CFT rules are interpreted. So we read the law, your Aruban ordinance, and your Aruba ordinance is broadly based on...
Which ordinance?
I don't have the...
So a law.
It's an existing... So we went through all the Aruban references based on your website and found the necessary ordinances that dealt with AML safety. And in it, it's a broad ordinance regulation, yes, which outlines requirement for AML safety.
Yes.
However, the argument from the stakeholders and evidenced by the POE example is that the interpretation of the AML safety regulation seems one size fits all. In other words, what you're applying for banks is what you're applying for small SMEs, is what you're applying for basically everyone. And however, the reality became, the question is, and again, all we're seeing is that it needs to be reconsidered, is that by using a one-size-fits-all approach to AML, safety, and KYC rules, you are making small persons without the capital requirements of the banks have to maintain the capital requirements of banks when they don't provide the systemic risk of banks. So while yes, we understand it, so this is the feedback we have gotten, and
it's completely wrong. So
okay, that's
sorry to say that.
Okay, well,
I think we should talk about it and to get it straightened out.
Sure.
Yeah, this is a long time ago. Yeah.
What was a long time ago?
Over-regulated. Compared to when the AML CFT ordinance came into effect, indeed it was more rule based.
Yes.
So indeed the challenge of the banks back then is indeed one size fits all, and it could be large companies versus very small mom and pop shops having to go through the same lengthy amount of submission of documents, etc., etc. I think that was really at the beginning. We have evolved from that, and of course banks have learned how to deal with this, and it's more looking at each sector and looking at it from a risk perspective. So it's no longer one size fits all, but it all depends on the industry and the risk of the company. So that is now being looked at.
Just to add on that, I echo her words on the risk-based approach, which is evident, but at the same time, it is certainly my experience that many of the service providers that are under supervision by the central bank, A, are not knowledgeable enough, B, are so risk averse that they apply a list-based approach instead of a risk-based approach. So no matter who the customer, no matter who the sector, they're just going to ask everything they can think of to have to fill up a long list, so to make sure that when Jane comes in, they don't get a fine. I mean, just that's the way the service providers are reacting. They're using a list instead of applying a risk, and that's part of that.
So the suggestion, therefore, is that while the central bank's regulations may have been modified over time, the implementation at the organizational level has not changed. Is that what you're suggesting?
I believe, especially when it comes to the banks and other service providers, they have not adapted to or implement the risk-based approach properly.
Well,
And that's a problem.
all right. So,
And on the policy regarding percentage of residence investment that need to be based onshore,
yes.
what residents are you referring to?
So one of the major issues one of the many stakeholders mentioned was the question that if they're Aruban and they want to make investments, and they have to make, and it particularly was institutional investors like insurance companies,
Only them.
right?
They are the only ones that are subject to that regulation. No other residents.
Oh, well. So the feedback we got primarily from the insurance sector was that but it was insurance on there was a private investor that mentioned as well in the stakeholder consultation.
Yeah.
Not an insurance firm, but a private individual, and they said that they were constrained. I'm just saying what we got back in our feedback.
That's also incorrect.
Okay, noted.
So it's only for institutional investors like the insurance. They have to have a minimum percentage. They should invest in Aruba, and that if you look at performance in international performance, you would say that that rule has really safeguard investments, Aruban investments.
No, so as I said,
Changing those rules, I mean, these are they serve a purpose. So they're only for insurance investments that concerns pension and things like that. So just to be that, there's no other residence investment. So
Well,
not like my investment or any other person.
So one of the major, I hear you, and I'm not disputing that, but the feedback we got from stakeholders, so it's either there's a misinterpretation of the current rules by the persons who informed us during the stakeholder consultation, and Central Bank was among those we consulted on back in February. There was a general consensus that there was a rules that have been long-standing that treated with the question of investment percentages.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
correct.
no,
It's
no,
only
no.
for institutional investors.
And the question arose, as I said, you're saying institutional investors, two other parties who were part of the Aruba Chamber of Commerce, one person from the Aruba Chamber of Commerce, not speaking as an insurance party, and another person from the Industry Association, both mentioned the question about their limitations to invest externally. So, and we're not saying in our report concretely to abandon anything. All we're saying is there's a possibility for consultation, for conversation about whether the current rules need to be tweaked to balance between the stability, which you've rightfully said, they have led to the stability in the market that our graphs demonstrated from the World Bank. So we're trying to say that there may need to be a conversation about modification, if possible, to look at new ways of ease of doing business, new channels for opportunity for investors, be it institutional and otherwise, without
These are for
risking.
incoming investors, isn't it?
What's this?
This is for incoming investors. I mean,
So it's both for incoming investors as well as current investors. So the report took feedback from what.
and how does the policy impact investments in fintech?
Well, as I said, we have not suggested a strong confirmation that anything should be removed or eliminated. All we're saying is.
No, sorry to interrupt, but I want to understand how they impede investments, local investments in fintech. So, that's
So,
very important.
okay. The broad picture is, right, so there are persons who want to invest in fintech, including cryptos, for example. So,
They can do it, there's no law right now.
Well, actually, our feedback said the actual opposite, because when we met with both the Bankers Association and the Central Bank in February, they actually said crypto investment is not allowed currently, and it was not a maybe or not. It was a definitive. We can't do it because it will affect our what do you call it, banking, our.
Oh, you mean institutional investors? That they-
No. Individuals nor businesses can invest in. Individuals cannot invest in cryptocurrencies. Your credit card is blocked.
Okay, that's something that the banks would do.
Okay, so it's an actual and it's a
But
policy.
there's no law that.
No, well,
that.
when we met with the
I think the banks are scared of the central bank.
no, so but when we met the central bank, funnily enough, when we met with the central bank, and the question, because we met with the Bankers Association first, and they were like, no, this is a non-starter. I'm like, okay, cool. So we met with the central bank. Is this a non-starter? He said, no, yes. This is a non-starter. This is not a non-starter. So both from the banks and the central bank, the question on investing in crypto, the question on limitations on the foreign exchange license regime in terms of if you're using foreign exchange or moving foreign exchange, you need a license. All these things were reaffirmed by both the banks and the central bank. So you're saying that it's not a law. I'm not sure if something changed in the last 3 months, but as I understand, you need a license, and it's on your website that you need a license to transit foreign exchange.
Yeah, but it's only limited for large capital investments. If you want to buy cryptocurrency, there's no law that prohibits you. Where? You can buy cryptocurrency as many as you want. If you use credit card, but if you have your own capital, you can buy anything you want. There's no foreign exchange license. At least, or maybe then that's.
So, and funnily enough, and I heard someone in the audience say that this is a Rube in a nutshell, but funnily enough, this was one of the other criticisms, and which is why our regulatory form language is very politically correct, where there was a concern raised by multiple persons about the opaqueness of decision making, and that there was not that necessary clarity, so people could predict what the application was going to be. So that this was not a problem of the Bankers Association. The Bankers Association were great for the CBA. The insurance firms less so, the insurance association less so, but then other parties were like, they are very unclear about the rationale behind CBA decision making. Thus, they were very wary of doing anything in the financial sector because they were not sure, there was no predictability of when CBA would intervene and make a judgment. Again, this is the feedback we got, and it was not repudiated by the central bank representatives when you were there.
There's some misunderstanding, miscommunication. If you want to buy something, and if you want to be part of a equity fund in the United States or in Asia, you're allowed to do it. There's no capital or any license requirement for that, unless you're moving $50 million from Aruba. So if you're going to use credit card from a local bank, that's a different thing. Yeah. But if you have your own capital, you say you have money saved in Aruba, like $1 million, and you want to buy cryptocurrency in the United States, you're free to do it. Nobody stops you.
The bank.
So nobody stops you, but if you want to use a credit card, that's something different. So maybe that is something, but if you want to buy cryptocurrency, people own cryptocurrency.
So can I ask a question? If I can't, so the major mechanism by which cryptocurrency markets accept payment is via credit cards. Okay, so That's the way they do it. So like right now I'm having that problem in Trinidad right now. I have a son going to school in the US and they don't want me to wire transfer money. I must only use my credit card. But then I have credit card limits back home. And my central bank will say there's nothing stopping you from paying your fees. But the only way they're accepting is this credit card and you're blocking my credit card. How can I do the transaction?
Yeah, but that's a different thing. That's a commercial bank issue. So it doesn't have anything to do with foreign exchange regulations.
I think they blocked it.
Well,
The central bank said.
Well, so,
Comment on that. I know there were some providers that were blocked for risk reasons, but and there's also certain limits on credit cards, so I really cannot comment further than that, knowing that.
all right, so the reality is, this is the feedback we've gotten from both non-bank stakeholders who were with us in February. When these questions were raised with the central bank, these issues were not repudiated, which is why they remained unchallenged in the report. So I see the Bankers Association wants to make a comment.
Yes, right here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed, I can't speak to the credit card limitations, but something we can certainly take a look into. Today, you can buy Bitcoin ETFs, so there is the ability for people to invest in that as a currency, but not hold the actual security. I did have another question, though. What you've laid out is a very robust roadmap, lots of details, and certainly some of the things that have been laid out should be done anyways. But one of the things that I'm curious to know if there's been any sizing as to A, the cost of doing this, whether that's something you've observed in other markets, and what the benefits are.
The benefits.
Yes, so from actual monetary, what that means to an economy, how much can be saved, because fundamentally, I think, on an island of 110,000 people, that as an expense may be significant, and so I think that's something that should be factored into the conversation.
No, I fundamentally agree with that intervention. It wasn't within our scope because of the methodology used. We're hoping that there can be further conversations with the government where we will have a more quantitative analysis to understand the cost implications of implementing some of these things. Recognizing that is why there's when you go through the report, there's a significant leaning towards public-private partnerships, so that from the private sector side, there would be that rigor and discipline brought to the fore before anything is pursued. Indeed, that's why the e-government transaction recommendation at the end, it's focused on using PPP, for that financial rigor, as well as when we met with stakeholders, it will the associations that will leading data protection implementation. So whereas if you do it without the PPP, and without the current proper GDPR law, there's a risk of a government going and not comparing, and I don't mean the politicians, I mean the public officers going in full excitement that we could do ABC and not recognize that you're breaking GDPR rules. Partnership with the private sector who are compliant because they need to be compliant to compete internationally, that would bring that rigor into being. So I take your point, Brian, but that reaffirms the reason why this report, which gives a roadmap, now has to be tested against the financial indicators so that we can determine which are the steps that are too far. If you go through in fact, this slide here, which highlighted areas which were grayed out, well, because some of these things like having a hyper-converged data center, on the face of it, no, right? So some of those things were obvious on the face of it, but in terms of the others that would need more detailed analyses and to determine which model and which nuanced approach would be done, I think there's room for more work in that regard.
Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
It was a very fruitful presentation, and especially with this ongoing discussion about banking system, central bank, I do have a critical question about, from the engineering and standpoint, that the current banking system is working like a point-to-multipoint system to the central bank.
Yes.
And how, in the near future, looking into a crystal ball, the banking world will evolve because of cryptocurrency, which is not a point-to-multipoint system. It's more a mesh,
All right.
a
So
peer-to-peer system, and what will be the role of the central bank and banks, and how it will change even the banking world in that perspective.
all right. So I don't think it's a very good point, but I don't think it is something based on market forces, and you have a robust banking market, insurance market. And if you have a robust telecom sector, that will solve itself. Here's why I say that. The banks at the central bank will be aware of their need to move away from a spoken wheel to a mesh. They will be aware of it. Their cybersecurity experts will be telling them what to do. As they decide to roll out DLT, they will be saying this is a more efficient way for data to move. If there's only one fixed line broadband operator, you have to wait on them and their availability to route your network. If you have competition, then you will have multiple persons rushing to supply that demand, because the banks will create a demand. I need networking done for me. I don't necessarily want to build it myself. I may want to build some myself. I may want to lease some circuits. I may want to use VPN over IP network. They will create that demand. If you have one operator, that operator has capacity, and that will control their speed to meet that demand. You create competition, all of a sudden your capacity multiplies, and therefore there will be innovation in how to resolve those, how to meet that demand as quickly as possible. So I don't think it's something that needs to be centrally engineered by the government. The market will take care of that. I'm sounding Republican here, aren't I? So, depending on the market. The market will largely take care of that once we have a vibrant competition in the fixed line, in the fixed market. Because then people will come and give you wireless point-to-point connections. People will come and give you fiber point-to-point connections. People will figure out how to fix some twisted copper for short runs. You will have the innovation, and this problem will solve itself. Yeah? I don't think we need to micromanage that. What we need to do is create a regulatory environment that allows those who want to invest in providing network connectivity. They feel this is a fair environment, I can compete in this environment, and it's not just going to be waiting on a singular operator and their capacities and their limitations. Yes?
I was referring to the policy based on how the central bank, for instance, is checking out the check and balances of all banks as a regulated body, and not as a telecommunication system, but
No, so, again.
in that regard, I was referring to the role as the central bank in managing
No, well,
the
even.
banking system, not
Okay, I hear you.
as the cryptocurrency, for instance, is a peer-to-peer system. There is no point that you can grab the data point went from here to here to here. It's
No, but in the end, the central bank, and on this I will defer to central banks, they would still want to be reporting of the net of all transactions. They will need, notwithstanding it's a peer-to-peer, everyone needs to report to the central bank, so the central bank knows where the monetary status is, so they could define a monetary policy prescriptions. So the central bank being centrally positioned to collect information, the money may not necessarily run through the central bank, but to collect the information of all transactions will not be changed. That's the fundamental basis of the ITU's studies on cryptocurrency and how and the implication to central banks. There are two sets of information: the information which moves the money, and the information which reports on the movement of the money. The information that reports on the movement of the money must always come back to your central bank.
Yes, that's one of the reasons that global credit cards are blocked. Maybe, I don't know.
No. It's much more complex.
Right, thank you, Randolph. Any further questions? Anyone?
Now, looking over this, I'm thinking that going forward with distributed exchanges, DEX, are you familiar with those?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, how does the central bank role plays in Aruba?
You all are jumping the gun on the scope of the study.
No,
so
I'm coming from New York and can tell you how we do things in New York.
Right, but you do things in New York based on a regulatory environment which
Right.
exists. Let me finish this point, and then you can continue. There's a regulatory environment which exists, and there's a commercial environment of operators, an ecosystem which already exists. We're trying to build that ecosystem first, then we could start overlaying the level of innovations you're talking about. So I'm not saying, so that's why I'm saying you're kind of jumping the gun. We'll get there eventually with a policy decision from the central bank, but before we get there, we have to build the ecosystem of players with the relevant securities and cross-checks to make sure that the financial sector stability is not compromised. We have to build all of that, and then we will have DEXs rolling out and all this kind of good stuff.
But the purpose of cryptocurrency is to avoid the central bank completely, peer-to-peer. Tell you, that's how we do it in New York. Trump just signed the law that says no CBDCs in New York.
No, again, so
they're saying, I'm saying, where are we going in Aruba? We're going to centralize
okay.
things?
Here's my again. You are jumping the gun a little bit, and here's why I'm saying you're jumping the gun a little bit. One must recall every economy, every sovereign economy, have their policy directions guiding their circumstance. Yes. The United States of America has a particular philosophy, especially when there's a Republican president. I'm not saying this Republican president, Republican presidents generally. They have a specific philosophy about deregulation. And there must be no big dog in charge, that we should all do peer-to-peer. And we should break down barriers between different markets because it allows for market efficiency. Okay? But that's what led to 2008, financial crisis. What happened in 2008 was the rules that were established in the 60s and 70s that separated different markets were broken down first by Clinton in the 90s and eliminated by the Bushes in the early noughties, leaving madness, wildness, what we say in Trinidad, wildness, like a carnival fete. Okay? I know you are a carnival here too, so you know when I say, I'm not saying wildness, I'm not saying wildness. I'm saying wildness. What's going on in New York and London? When the bottom fell out of the wildness, what happened? How many companies, Fannie Mae went belly up? People were overexposed because the rules that would have stopped them from being overexposed were removed. Canada was not so affected.
Yeah,
Germany, no, let me finish. Germany wasn't so affected. This is a point I'm making. I'm making a point that countries have the right to determine their risk profile. And which is why I am not crazy enough from the depth of study we've done here to recommend, ECLAC isn't crazy enough to recommend to say, remove central bank from cryptocurrency. Because we can't say that. Because Aruba, through its central bank, will have to do their risk analysis. The minister and the parliament, through the all legal system, has to create, do we accept this risk analysis? Do we signal as a policy we want to take on more risk or less? But the fact of the matter is, we can't say this is what we do in New York, this is what we're going to do in Aruba. We have to do the studies first. We have to understand our risk profile first. Because cryptocurrency is happening in Holland. I'm fairly sure when last I checked, Holland Central Bank is somehow involved. There's a reporting framework.
No, but the thing is, in Holland, in Europe, they created the MiCA law.
Correct.
So the MICA law is already a framework for how you're going to do it. KYC, all the necessary.
Agreed.
But there is no central bank involved.
Hold a second. We like to say there's no central bank involved. There's no central bank involved at the initial level. But let me finish. But it all, trust me, it all gets back to a central bank. You know why? Because a cryptocurrency, as a currency, is a part of your monetary policy framework overall. And the central banks manage monetary policy. If you don't manage monetary policy, your value of all your currencies, even crypto, tend to zero. And if it tends to zero, your debt is zero. That means your wealth is zero. And nobody here wants wealth to be equal to zero. So what I'm saying is, and what this report says, is that the central bank has to be involved in the relevant qualitative studies that would identify risk, that would identify the impact on monetary policy to find the appropriate mix of frameworks that will allow for some sort of cryptocurrency behavior that will afford trade. We're not saying do with anything, we're saying review. If you notice throughout, it just says review, because the level of study and analysis, the qualitative analysis that will be required far exceeds the scope of this initiative. So what we're saying is we know we need to get certain laws in place. We know we need to get certain institutional strengths in place. That's a given. Not so? The next question we have to ask is, if we're going down this road, are we going at 100 kilometers an hour, 50 kilometers an hour, 25 kilometers an hour, or 0 kilometers an hour? But that's a study that's outside the scope of this.
Last question then.
Sure.
What's the time frame for Aruba to be diverse in this whole thing? What's the time frame you see Aruba?
Well, no, you're trying to, I am not Minister Wever. He's better looking than I am.
30 years?
No. If we move with alacrity.
Capital investment is about it.
Right. So Aruba is in the lands, has the lands packet with Holland, with the other initiatives where I'm taking the minister's speech, but I'm sure he's going to say this better than I am when I'm done. There are frameworks being worked on with the government of Aruba and other players to help bring us up to speed, to bring Aruba up to speed. What we've given here is a roadmap of where we need to focus, where they need to be focused in these initiatives. Thereafter, then there'll be a timeline, a political timeline, an economic timeline. At that point, they'll be able to give you timeline. This is merely the roadmap, not necessarily the timeline. This is only concrete plan. Okay?
So it has to be done by next year because launch packet stops. So technically next year.
Well,
2027.
You and the minister need to argue about that. I stay out of that. All right. Okay. I'm sure that's the last question. Yes. Okay. Thanks a lot, folks. No.
I just want to add to that question, and before I close the session, thank you very much. It was a very informative session, and thank you all for your attention. This is, let's say, the beginning of a new development, and hearing from the feedback, there's still a lot that needs to be further discussed, investigated, and a definitive implementation plan needs to be established, but in consultation with all our stakeholders within the reach of Aruba. And to answer your question, and when we discussed diversification opportunities with the Dutch government, the development of fintech was one of the, let's say, key components, and we agreed that we would engage ECLAC to conduct this initiative, this study, and that the Dutch government will hereafter help us with the implementation of fintech in Aruba. It's already part of the Landspakket. We already agreed on it, I think, last year, and an agreement has been signed that they will help us with the implementation. And from the presentation, you see that, for instance, legislation needs to be amended, certain legislation. Let's assume that we follow this roadmap. Then you need to have lawyers to draft legislation. There is a full process that needs to be implemented. So timeline, a definite timeline cannot be indicated at this point. not even, let's say, scope of cost. But I think the most important part is that we have now a first document, and with your feedback, we will soon determine what the exact steps will be, and the Dutch government will help us with the implementation. So that there is a lot that has been done, but a definite time frame can't be, let's say, established at this moment yet. Again, I want to thank everybody for your attention. This is, I think it's an important step for Aruba, and I appreciate your input, your effort, and ECLAC, I'm very, very grateful for the work you have conducted. And we will keep in contact, because this has not been finalized. This is just the beginning, and we will need your further expertise to bring this initiative to a happy end. Thank you very much.